When we first started the show, I really thought we were doing a show about building cars and motorcycles for people. It evolved into a show about people and their story. It really brought challenges in the early days.
20 years of building a television empire, and Danny Koker never publicly ranked the people who nearly tore it apart. Until now. For over a decade, Counting Cars gave fans a polished window into Counts Customs, a shop in Las Vegas where flame paint jobs, roaring engines, and family-style camaraderie made for some of the most beloved reality television of its era. But polish hides fingerprints, and behind every smooth 30-minute episode was a mess of real deadlines, real money, and real people who didn't always live up to the trust placed in them. Some walked away, quietly. Others left craters. This is the story of the 5 names Danny Koker has finally opened up about. The ones fans either forgot, misunderstood, or never even knew existed. Before diving into the fallout, it helps to understand what Danny built and why betrayal cut so deep. Koker grew up in Detroit surrounded by muscle cars and the sound of his father's music career, a combination that shaped both his mechanical instincts and his showman's charisma. He moved to Las Vegas in the early 1990s, first finding local fame as a horror movie television host before quietly starting Counts Customs to maintain his personal car collection. Word of his build spread through the Vegas scene, and a chance connection with the crew at the Gold and Silver Pawn Shop, home of History Channel's Pawn Stars, gave him his first national exposure. Producers noticed how audiences responded to his knowledge and charm, and by 2012, Counting Cars had become its own show. What started as a small operation with a handful of loyal mechanics ballooned into a media brand, and that growth came with a cost nobody warned Danny about. The people around him started changing, and some of them changed in ways that would damage the business he spent decades building. The first name on Danny's list barely appeared on screen at all, which is exactly what made the betrayal sting so much. Joseph Frontier worked behind the scenes as the company's bookkeeper, handling payroll, bills, and the day-to-day financial operations that kept Counts Customs running. For a while, everything appeared normal. Frontier had been placed at the shop through a staffing agency, and Danny extended him the same trust he gave any employee handling sensitive responsibilities. But an internal review eventually revealed that Frontier had been quietly draining company funds for his own benefit, siphoning off more than $75,000 over time. The money didn't just vanish into thin air. It went toward a personal down payment on a Range Rover and covered airline tickets for his own travel. To keep the scheme hidden, Frontier forged Danny's signature and falsified records, meaning this wasn't a case of sloppy bookkeeping or an honest mistake. It was calculated. When the truth came out in 2016, Counts Customs filed a lawsuit not only against Frontier, but against the staffing agency, Randstad USA, arguing the company had failed to properly vet him before placing him in a position of financial trust. By the time the story became public, Frontier had already vanished from the show without explanation, leaving fans to wonder why a familiar face had simply stopped appearing. Since then, he has stayed almost entirely out of view. No interviews, no social media presence, nothing. For Danny, the experience left a lasting mark, prompting tighter financial controls and a more cautious approach to who gets access to the shop's books. It was a hard lesson. The people who never touch a wrench can do just as much damage as anyone who does. The second name carries a very different kind of story, one rooted less in scandal and more in mismatched priorities. Scott Jones was one of the very first faces fans saw when Counting Cars premiered, serving as shop manager and handling much of the budgeting that kept builds on schedule. Where Danny brought vision and creative ambition, Scott brought restraint, often pushing back on costs, and reminding the team that the business side of things mattered just as much as the artistry. That tension became a defining dynamic of the show's earliest seasons, with viewers either enjoying the back and forth or seeing it as a genuine rift between two very different working styles. Then, after season 2, Scott was simply gone, with no on-screen explanation and no farewell moment. Speculation filled the gap immediately, with some fans assuming he'd been pushed out over financial disagreements or larger conflicts behind the scenes. The reality, as later reporting clarified, was far less dramatic. Scott relocated to Tennessee to be closer to family, a personal decision that had nothing to do with money or fallout with Danny. He has continued working in the automotive world ever since, running his own shop called Koker's Extreme Automotive and even appearing on Netflix's Swap Shop. His story stands as a reminder that not every disappearance from a hit show is rooted in scandal. Sometimes life simply pulls people in a different direction, and the cameras just aren't there to capture it. The third name belonged to one of the most genuinely beloved personalities the show ever had, which made his exit especially painful for longtime viewers. Rolly Sabo joined as the shop's lead detailer starting in season 2, quickly becoming known for his thick accent, relentless energy, and perfectionist streak when it came to making every finished car shine. He wasn't just comic relief. His actual detailing work was meticulous, and by season 4 he had become a certified fan favorite, the kind of cast member people specifically tuned in to see. Then in 2017, news broke that thousands of dollars in professional detailing equipment had gone missing from the shop, and shortly afterward, Rolly disappeared from the show entirely, with no goodbye scene and no public statement from Counts Customs. Quiet rumors connected the missing gear to his sudden absence, though the shop never confirmed anything officially, leaving fans caught between disbelief and disappointment. For many viewers, it was hard to reconcile the fun-loving personality they'd grown attached to with whispers of theft, and the lack of closure only made it more unsettling. Despite the cloud surrounding his departure, Rolly didn't vanish from the industry. He stayed in Las Vegas and opened his own business, Rock and Raleigh Custom Detailing, continuing to build a reputation on the same high-quality work that made him popular in the first place. Whatever happened behind closed doors, his skills were never in question, only the trust that came with them. The fourth name represents a loss that had nothing to do with money or missing equipment, but instead spoke to a deeper conflict between craftsmanship and the demands of television itself. Shannon Aiken served as the shop's lead motorcycle builder for years, quietly producing some of the most technically impressive bikes to ever come out of Counts Customs. He wasn't loud, he wasn't dramatic, and he rarely sought the spotlight, letting his welds and his finished builds speak for him instead. But as Counting Cars matured as a television product, the show leaned harder into manufactured tension and storyline-driven drama to keep ratings competitive, a shift that didn't sit well with someone who had built his entire career around real craftsmanship rather than performance. By season 7, Shannon's screen time had noticeably dropped, and by the following season he had all but disappeared, with no dramatic exit and no explanation offered to viewers. According to people close to the production, the departure came down to creative differences rather than any personal conflict with Danny, a quiet parting rooted in the sense that the show's direction no longer matched what Shannon valued in his work. He didn't complain publicly and didn't burn any bridges. He simply stepped back, the same understated way he had always operated, and continued building motorcycles independently in the Las Vegas custom scene, still respected by people who know real craftsmanship when they see it. The fifth and final name belonged to arguably the most visually unforgettable personality the show ever featured, a man whose talent and eccentricity made him instantly recognizable to fans. Mike Henry, known to viewers as Horny Mike because of his signature horned helmet and wild mohawk, worked as the shop's lead airbrush artist, transforming ordinary vehicles and helmets into intricate works of art using flames, skulls, and elaborate murals. His background in custom paint and sculpting gave him a creative edge that Danny initially embraced. And for years, the partnership produced some of the show's most visually striking builds. But that same creative ambition eventually became a source of friction. Mike wanted more freedom to push boundaries with bold designs, while Danny, protective of the shop's brand and image, often needed a more restrained, classic aesthetic that fit the